Today we're going to read the third part of The Tale of Benjamin Bunny. Part 3 is the end of the story, or I think we should be able to finish it today in this session. And The Tale of Benjamin Bunny is the sequel to The Tale of Peter Rabbit. You should remember that by now. And Benjamin Bunny is Peter Rabbit's cousin. So let's go over what we saw in the story, and then we can start on part 3, which I think will take us to the end of the story. It's a little bit interesting at the end. So here's a picture of Peter Rabbit's home with his mother and his 3 siblings. And Benjamin Bunny, his cousin, is this cute little guy wearing clogs. Clogs are a kind of shoe. Sometimes they're made of wood. And Benjamin, he sees that Mr. McGregor, the farmer, went away in his little wagon with Mrs. McGregor. And so that means the farm has no people there, right? And so if the people are away, the bunnies can play. And so Benjamin goes to his aunt's house and finds little Peter Rabbit outside, no clothes, feeling kind of sad. And Benjamin says, "Hey, let's go get your clothes back from Mr. McGregor's garden." Because in The Tale of Peter Rabbit, he went to the garden and lost all of his clothes and his shoes, and it was kind of a disaster. And so they go back to the garden and they find Peter's clothes, and they find a nice hat for Benjamin, but it's a little too big. And then they find some onions in the garden and decide to take some home. But how did Peter feel? Peter felt really nervous. He was afraid that Mr. McGregor would come back, right? But Benjamin, he didn't care. He felt at home. He felt really comfortable. And he was just eating some lettuce and relaxing. And so the two of them are walking around. They found Peter's clothes and they want to take the onions back home. But Peter dropped some because he's nervous. And then he dropped some more. And then when they walk around a corner, what did they see? Dun dun dun! They found a cat. And that's pretty scary. They're worried the cat will come and hunt them. They know that Mr. McGregor and Mrs. McGregor are away, but they forgot the cat is at the garden. And so they need to be very careful. Okay? And so we can start from here, which is what we finished reading last time, okay? And they walk around the corner. This is what those little rabbits saw round that corner. Little Benjamin took one look, and then, in half a minute less than no time, he hid himself and Peter and the onions underneath a large basket. So the two rabbits see the cat and run and hide under a basket, like in this picture. Now this is where we start the new part 3 of our story. The cat got up and stretched herself and came and sniffed at the basket. Perhaps she liked the smell of onions. Anyway, she sat down upon the top of the basket. So Peter and Benjamin are hiding under this basket. The cat got up and stretched herself. To stretch means move your body and make your body long, to kind of exercise your muscles, to stretch your muscles. So the cat stretched and came and sniffed at the basket. To sniff is to use your nose and go That's called a sniff. The word is a little bit like the sound. Sniff, 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 sniff. So the sound of smelling. So the cat smelled the basket. The cat sniffed at the basket. Usually when we have sniffed, we do sniffed at. So it's kind of like you make that sound. Sniff in the direction of something. To sniff at something. And perhaps she liked the smell of onions. Do you think so? Is that what the cat is smelling? Here the word perhaps is another way to say maybe. So maybe she liked the smell of onions. Come on. Maybe I'll put it over here. It's a little bit more formal than the word maybe. It sounds a little bit more formal, but people say both. I think Americans might say maybe more often. British people say perhaps more often. I say both. And then, anyway, she sat down upon the top of the basket. Anyway is like, who cares what I said before? Let's move on. So, perhaps she likes the smell of onions. Whatever. Anyway, let's move on. Anyway, she sat down upon the top of the basket. So the cat went on top. And here we go. She sat there for 5 hours. I cannot draw you a picture of Peter and Benjamin underneath the basket, because it was quite dark, and because the smell of onions was fearful. It made Peter Rabbit and little Benjamin cry. The sun got round behind the wood, and it was quite late in the afternoon, but still the cat sat upon the basket. So poor Benjamin and Peter. She sat there for 5 hours. Oh my gosh. And then, I cannot draw you a picture of Peter and Benjamin underneath the basket. Why not? Because it was quite dark. Here, the word quite is kind of like pretty. It was pretty dark. Pretty dark is like a little more than kind of. So it was kind of dark, but a little bit more. It was pretty dark. It was quite dark. Okay? Well, it's more like pretty. Whatever. Quite is kind of tricky. It's not exactly very, but it's close to very. Anyways, it was quite dark, and because the smell of onions was fearful. Fearful usually means scared, right? I am fearful of spiders. I think most people are fearful of spiders. But here, the smell of onions was fearful. That's kind of strange. This is a little bit of an old-fashioned way to say terrible. Or horrible, very bad. So, most of the time now, people would use fearful to mean afraid or full of fear. But in this story, it means terrible, very bad. The smell of onions was fearful. So the author doesn't want to draw the inside of the basket because it's dark, and the smell of onions is terrible. Okay, why won't they draw them under the basket if the onions are terrible? Well, it made Peter Rabbit and little Benjamin cry. So the smell of onions was fearful. The smell of onions, made Peter and Benjamin cry. If you cut onions, it makes you cry. So they're crying under the basket. Oh, maybe they're scared too. And so the author didn't draw them because it's too sad. the sun got round behind the wood. Here, it's not round like a circle. I think we said before that round can be like around. So the sun moved behind the wood being the forest. The sun went around behind the forest, behind the trees. So it's starting to get dark. And it was quite late in the afternoon. It was pretty late. But still the cat sat upon the basket. So the cat is not moving. At length, there was a pitter-patter, pitter-patter, and some bits of mortar fell from the wall above. The cat looked up and saw old Mr. Benjamin Bunny prancing along the top of the wall of the upper terrace. He was smoking a pipe of rabbit tobacco and had a little switch in his hand. He was looking for his son. Oh, there might be noises. Yesterday was the 4th of July, and it sounds like people are lighting fireworks outside. So if you hear a strange sound, it might be fireworks. Okay, so at length, I'll read the sentence again. At length, there was a pitter-patter, pitter-patter, and some bits of mortar fell from the wall above. At length, now, in modern times, would mean for a long time. So let's say you go to school and your teacher is telling stories for a long time. So it's like, oh my gosh, my teacher spoke at length about the history of England. So that would mean the teacher talked for a long time about the history of England. So if someone spoke at length, that means for a long time. Maybe, oh, my boss spoke at length about next year's schedule. So it sounds like it's a long time. Now, in this story, they're using it, or the author is using it in an old way. What do you think it means here? In this story, it means maybe a long time later. So after a while. Remember, it was 5 hours, right? And so after a long time, something happened. So that's how the author's using it here. At length, there was a pitter-patter. So after a long time, there was a pitter-patter. Pitter-patter is just a sound. Pitter-patter, pitter-patter. Okay? What do you think is making that sound? Pitter-patter, pitter-patter. Here, maybe it's his feet walking on the wall. Or maybe it's the other thing that is in the sentence. Some bits of mortar fell from the wall above. So see this wall. There are stones, and in between the stones, there is something called mortar. So there might be 2 stones. Mortar goes in the middle, and that will hold it together. And so when the father is walking around, some of the mortar is falling out, and it falls to the ground. It goes pitter-patter, pitter-patter. Okay? This phrase, pitter-patter, is that sound. What is something else that makes that sound? Pitter-patter, pitter-patter. It sounds like rain. So pitter-patter is the sound of rain, usually. In this story, it's the sound of falling like dirt in rocks. The mortar is falling. But usually you use pitter-patter to talk about the rain. There was a pitter-patter of rain on the window. That kind of sound. Okay. So I'll read it one more time. At length, there was a pitter-patter, pitter-patter, and some bits of mortar fell from the wall above. The cat looked up and saw old Mr. Benjamin Bunny prancing along the top of the wall of the upper terrace. So the cat looks up. Old Mr. Benjamin Bunny. wait a second. This story is about Benjamin Bunny. Who is Mr. Benjamin Bunny? Well, this is Benjamin Bunny's father. So both of them have the same name. But it says Mr., so you know it's his father. Okay? A little bit tricky. And he was prancing along the top of the wall of the upper terrace. Prancing is kind of like walking. It's like walking, except a little bit more fancy. You can kind of see the way he's standing. He's a gentle, you can't say gentleman, gentle rabbit. He's a gentle rabbit walking around, and he's prancing like walking in a fancy way. Okay? He's prancing along the top of the wall of the upper terrace. The upper terrace, in a garden, there are layers, and each layer of, like, it's flat, and then it goes up. It's flat, it goes up. Each of those levels is a terrace. Kind of like, I'll use green. So it's flat, and then maybe there's a little wall, and then it's flat. Each of these parts is called a terrace. Okay? And then what about Mr. Benjamin Bunny? He was smoking a pipe of rabbit tobacco and had a little switch in his hand. So here's his pipe in his mouth, and it's rabbit tobacco. Now, tobacco is what's inside of a cigarette, but we learned that rabbit tobacco is actually lavender in this story. Lavender is a purple flower. And he had a little switch in his hand. A switch is a little stick. A thin, straight stick. You can see right here. And we'll see what he uses that for later. He was looking for his son. So he has this stick. He's walking around smoking his pipe. He's like, "Where is Benjamin, my son?" Dun, dun, dun. Old Mr. Bunny had no opinion whatever of cats. He took a tremendous jump off the top of the wall onto the top of the cat and cuffed it off the basket and kicked it into the greenhouse, scratching off a handful of fur. The cat was too much surprised to scratch back. Mr. Bunny is really intense. So old Mr. Bunny had no opinion whatever of cats. This is an old way to say hated cats. Or some people might say this, it's not very common, but no opinion sounds like you have no feeling. An opinion is your feeling about something. Oops, I can't type. Come on. Oh, come on. It's dancing. Oh, whatever. Oh, there we go. So all of this together is kind of like he hated cats. He had no opinion of cats. So if you have no feelings about cats, that sounds like you don't care. But no opinion means like you have no good feelings about cats. Okay? So old Mr. Bunny had no opinion whatever of cats. He doesn't like cats. He hates them. So what did he do? He took a tremendous jump off the top of the wall onto the top of the cat. Tremendous means huge or incredible. It could be a huge jump. That's what my first thing when I think tremendous. Or incredible, like amazing. He took an incredible jump off the top of the wall. So, shoo, boom, on top of the cat. And cuffed it off the basket. Cuffed it is not very common, but it's kind of like hit. Or a little bit like, it's a little bit like punched, but not exactly. To punch someone means you hit them with your fist like this. To cuff someone is kind of like slap, but maybe your hand is a little bit closed, like boom. So punch is the front of your hand. Cuffed is like a little bit like a slap. And so he cuffed it off the basket. Okay? So thunk, off the basket and kicked it into the greenhouse. A greenhouse is a little house or a little room for vegetables or plants that need to stay warm. And when it's cold in the winter, the greenhouse will keep them warm. Okay? And when Mr. Bunny did that, he scratched off a handful of fur. So when he cuffed the cat, he scratched a handful of fur. So boom, and his hand was full of the cat's fur from scratching. Ouch. The cat was too much surprised to scratch back. This is an old way of writing it. I would say much too surprised is how I might say it. The cat was much too surprised to scratch back. So whack, kick, and the cat goes flying. Whoa! And he's so surprised he can't fight back. Okay? I'll read the middle part one more time. So jump, hit, kick, scratch. He took a tremendous jump off the top of the wall onto the top of the cat, cuffed it off the basket, and kicked it into the greenhouse, scratching off a handful of fur. The cat was too much surprised to scratch back. So old Mr. Bunny is pretty intense, kind of a good fighter, I guess. Okay. And then what happens when he lifts the basket and finds his son? Oh God. So when old Mr. Bunny had driven the cat into the greenhouse, he locked the door. Then he came back to the basket and took out his son Benjamin by the ears. Ooh, ow, ooh, ah. And whipped him with the little switch. Whoosh. He then took out his nephew Peter. Oh my God. When I read this part of the story, I was like, oh my gosh, poor Benjamin. But 100 years ago, parents were not very nice to their kids sometimes. So when old Mr. Bunny had driven the cat into the greenhouse. Now, driven is not drive a car. It's like pushed. It's a little bit like pushed or forced. He forced the cat into the greenhouse, or pushed him into the greenhouse. He locked the door. Click, so the cat can't come out. Then he came back to the basket and took out his son Benjamin by the ears. So he grabbed Benjamin's ears and pulled him out of the basket. So you can see right here. Oh, poor Benjamin. This is terrible. And whipped him with the little switch. Now, this is not what parents should do to their kids, but a long time ago, a lot of parents hit their kids. Hopefully, most parents don't do this anymore. I know some people do, but I don't think it's okay. Whipped is like hit, but hit really quickly. Whipped him whoosh, with the little switch. Remember, the switch is this stick, not a Nintendo Switch, but with a little stick. So he's hitting him on the butt. Ouch, poor Benjamin. Then he took out his nephew Peter. Oh, Moms and dads 100 years ago were a little bit scary. Poor Benjamin. Okay, next. Then he took out the handkerchief of onions and marched out of the garden. So the father took the handkerchief of onions back there, took some lettuce. The cat is in the greenhouse locked away. And poor Benjamin, he's holding his back and his butt because his dad hit him. Oh, too scary. Okay. When Mr. McGregor returned about half an hour later, he observed several things which perplexed him. It looked as though some person had been walking all over the garden in a pair of clogs. Only the footmarks were too ridiculously little. Also, he could not understand how the cat could have managed to shut herself up inside the greenhouse, locking the door upon the outside. So, here's Mr. McGregor, he's back, and he's very confused. When Mr. McGregor returned about half an hour later, he observed several things which perplexed him. Observed is kind of like noticed, or he saw several things. Okay? He saw several things which perplexed him. Perplexed is almost the same as confused. Yeah. I think the same. If there's a tiny difference, I'm not even sure how they're different, but almost exactly the same. Something perplexes you. Confused is more common, but you might hear the word perplexed. Another fun word for confused I like is flabbergasted. This is a fun word. Whoops. Oh no. Oh no. Sorry. There we go. I clicked the wrong thing. Flabbergasted is like confused, but totally confused. Like, what the heck is going on? And it just sounds very funny. So if someone is flabbergasted, they're so confused, they don't know what's going on. And so Mr. McGregor is perplexed, maybe even flabbergasted. What the heck? So it looked as though some person had been walking all over the garden in a pair of clogs. So it looked as though blah, blah, blah. Here, as though is like. It looked like blah, blah, blah. So it's the same idea. It looked as though blah, blah, blah. It looked like blah, blah, blah. As though might be a little more formal sounding, but both are okay. It looked as though some person had been walking all over the garden in a pair of clogs. Now we talked about clogs are a kind of shoe, and some clogs are made of wood. So clogs look like this. And you might have wooden clogs like these ones right here. Okay? So he saw, it looked like someone was walking around with clogs. Only the footmarks were too ridiculously little. I think you know the word ridiculous, but ridiculously means like it's so crazy you can't believe it. They were ridiculously little. And remember, footmarks are like footprints. Remember that. So the footprints were too ridiculously little. It's like, how are they so small? Who was walking around? Oh, Candace has a question. Is flabbergasted as common as confused? No. Confused is the most common one. Flabbergasted is not very common, but people like to use it sometimes because it's a funny word and it means like very, very confused. Super confused. So it's not as common, but you will see it sometimes because it's kind of a funny sounding word. People like to say it. Good question though. So confused is very common. Flabbergasted, not very common. Perplexed, medium, not very common either. But confused is definitely number one. Good question. But okay, why is he perplexed? Why is he confused? He saw footprints and they're super tiny. Super tiny. Okay. Also, he could not understand how the cat could have managed to shut herself up inside the greenhouse. So it's hard for the cat to get in the greenhouse. And then also locking the door upon the outside. So the cat got inside, but locked the door on the outside. So he's very confused. What? How did you do that? He doesn't think that a bunny came and locked the door. No way. Okay, let's keep going. So Mr. McGregor doesn't find the rabbits and the rabbits get away. And Benjamin and Peter go back home. When Peter got home, his mother forgave him because she was so glad to see that he had found his shoes and coat. Cottontail and Peter folded up the pocket handkerchief, and old Mrs. Rabbit strung up the onions and hung them from the kitchen ceiling with the bunches of herbs and the rabbit tobacco. So, when Peter got home, his mother forgave him. This is the past tense of forgive. So, to forgive someone means say, it's okay. I'm not angry anymore. It's okay. So his mother forgave him. Oh, it's okay. You're not in trouble. I'm not angry anymore. Why? Because she was so glad, she was so happy to see that he had found his shoes and coat. Glad is like happy. And she's happy because he found his clothes. Cottontail and Peter folded up the pocket handkerchief. You can see it in the picture. They're folding the handkerchief. And old Mrs. Rabbit strung up the onions and hung them from the kitchen ceiling. To string something up means use a string and wrap it around and hang it up. So string is like a very thin thread or like a rope. A rope is thick. Oh, here's a string. Here's my water bottle. There's some strings hanging off of it. And so you tie this around the onion and hang it from the ceiling. So she strung up the onions and hung them from the kitchen ceiling. The ceiling meaning the top of the room, right? So she strung them up with the bunches of herbs and the rabbit tobacco, which is the purple lavender. And the end. So the end of the story is that Peter Rabbit and Benjamin are able to find Peter's clothes. They get caught by the cat and they get stuck for 5 hours. And Benjamin's crazy father comes and goes, rah, hiya, hiya, hiya. And he fights the cat, kicks the cat, and then saves Benjamin and Peter. Oh, he's so nice. But then, whack, he hits Benjamin. Oh my gosh, poor guy. And then Peter is able to bring the onions back home and everyone is safe and happy. But poor little Benjamin, he got hit on the butt, so he's not very happy. Okay, and the end. That's the end of the story for Benjamin Bunny. He was able to help his cousin, and they were able to get some snacks for Peter's family. So let's go back and read this part of the story one more time, and then we can call it a day. We can say goodbye. So Benjamin and Peter are stuck they're hiding under the basket. The cat got up and stretched herself and came and sniffed at the basket. Perhaps she liked the smell of onions. Anyway, she sat down upon the top of the basket. She sat there for 5 hours. I cannot draw you a picture of Peter and Benjamin underneath the basket because it was quite dark and because the smell of onions was fearful. Oh. It made Peter Rabbit and little Benjamin cry. Oh. The sun got round behind the wood, and it was quite late in the afternoon. But still, the cat sat upon the basket. At length, there was a pitter-patter, pitter-patter, and some bits of mortar fell from the wall above. The cat looked up and saw old Mr. Benjamin Bunny prancing along the top of the wall of the upper terrace. He was smoking a pipe of rabbit tobacco and had a little switch in his hand. He was looking for his son. Old Mr. Bunny had no opinion whatever of cats. He took a tremendous jump off the top of the wall and onto the top of the cat and cuffed it off the basket and kicked it into the greenhouse, scratching off a handful of fur. The cat was too much surprised to scratch back. Oh! When old Mr. Bunny had driven the cat into the greenhouse, he locked the door. Then he came back to the basket and took out his son Benjamin by the ears and whipped him with the little switch. Then he took out his nephew Peter. Oh, poor Benjamin. Then he took out the handkerchief of onions and marched out of the garden. When Mr. McGregor returned, about half an hour later, he observed several things which perplexed him. It looked as though some person had been walking all over the garden in a pair of clogs. Only the footmarks were too ridiculously little. Also, he could not understand how the cat could have managed to shut herself up inside the greenhouse, locking the door upon the outside. When Peter got home, his mother forgave him, because she was so glad to see that he had found his shoes and coat. Cottontail and Peter folded up the pocket handkerchief, and old Mrs. Rabbit strung up the onions and hung them from the kitchen ceiling, with the bunches of herbs and the rabbit tobacco. The end. So that's the tale of Benjamin Bunny. He and Peter went on a little adventure to Mr. McGregor's garden. Benjamin was very confident and wasn't scared at all. But then what happened was that the cat found them. But luckily, his father came and saved the day. But because Benjamin was a little bit silly, oops, he got in big trouble and his dad hit him with a switch. Ugh, not so good. So that's it for today. I hope you had a good time learning about Benjamin Bunny and Peter Rabbit and their little adventure. I think this is a cute story, but the part about Benjamin's father is a little bit scary. Parents, please do not hit your children, okay? There are better ways, right? But that's the second story in the Peter Rabbit series. So I hope you had a good time. I hope you learned something new. And if you're interested in learning more Peter Rabbit stories, please let me know, and maybe we could try another one in the future. I think there are some stories about his other family and friends, right? So let's stop here for today. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you had fun. I hope you liked our friend Benjamin Bunny. He's very cute. And I hope you have a great day. And I'll see you next time. So thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.